Welcome to Learn English Lab. In today's 1-hour C1 Advanced English Listening Practice, you'll discover why some habits last for years while others disappear within days, and why motivation alone is one of the biggest myths about personal success. Through fascinating real-life stories, practical psychology, and advanced English vocabulary used by native speakers, you'll learn how small daily actions create extraordinary results. This lesson is designed to sharpen your listening skills, expand your C1 level vocabulary, and help you understand natural English while exploring powerful ideas about discipline, consistency, and lasting change. So put on your headphones, relax, and let's begin your journey towards stronger English and stronger habits.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here with you today, and I want to warmly welcome you, the listener, to our deep dive. Over the next hour or so, we are going to, explore some profoundly transformative concepts that really explain why that 92% failure rate for New Year's resolutions exists.
Yeah, that 92% statistic is just wild to think about. I mean, consider that for a second. That means almost every single person listening to this right now, myself included, honestly, has this huge graveyard of abandoned habits.
Oh, absolutely.
Diets we quit, languages we stopped learning, gym memberships we totally forgot to cancel. So today, the mission of this deep dive is to figure out why that happens. And, spoiler alert, it has absolutely nothing to do with your willpower being broken.
Right, and I can promise you this. By the time we finish today, you won't just walk away with a richer, more sophisticated English vocabulary. You are going to leave with a completely rebuilt framework for how you operate daily. We are going to dismantle a lot of what society has told you about success.
I am so ready for this because, I feel like I'm constantly fighting my own brain.
We all do. It's human nature.
Yeah. So the very first thing we need to tackle is this deeply held belief that I think is, it's practically hardwired into us from childhood.
The motivation myth, right?
Yes. We see it in sports movies, Nike commercials, those motivational speeches on social media. It's this idea that motivation is the ultimate magical fuel for changing your life. You watch a Rocky movie, the music swells, and you think, that's it, I'm changing my life tomorrow.
It is a remarkably pervasive myth. And it is entirely understandable why we cling to it so tightly. Motivation feels incredible.
Oh, it feels amazing.
When you get that sudden surge of energy, maybe after watching an inspiring documentary or having a deep conversation with a friend, your brain is actually flooded with dopamine. It is an emotional high. You feel unstoppable.
You really do.
Yeah.
And for those first few days of a new habit, you feel completely different. And actually, the word that perfectly captures this, and it's a fantastic C1 level adjective for our listeners, is invincible.
Ooh, invincible. That's a great one.
Yeah, you feel invincible, like you are completely unconquerable and absolutely nothing can defeat you. You wake up at 5 a.m., you're smiling, you're drinking green juice, and you're thinking, why didn't I do this years ago?
That is a brilliant word to highlight. When you feel invincible, you are riding a wave of neurochemicals. You confidently choose the healthy salad for lunch without a second thought. You genuinely believe in your core that your previous struggles are behind you.
Right.
But here is the structural flaw in that approach. Motivation is a mood, not a mechanism.
Okay, let's unpack this. A mood, not a mechanism. That is a massive distinction.
It really is. Think about what a mood is. It is a temporary state of mind that rises and falls based on incredibly fragile, constantly shifting variables.
Right, like how much sleep you got.
Spot on. Your motivation on any given Tuesday is affected by the quality of your sleep the night before. It is affected by a passive-aggressive email you received from your boss. It's affected by the weather outside, or even a drop in your blood sugar because you skipped breakfast.
Building your entire life strategy on something that fluctuates based on, like, a cloudy day.
Well, it's like building a beautiful, expensive house on a foundation of sand.
That's a perfect analogy. You can paint the walls, put in gorgeous windows, and it might look perfect during the sunny summer days. But the absolute second a winter storm rolls in, that sand is washing away and the whole house is coming down.
That is absolutely true. To illustrate this collapse, I was recently reviewing a classic case study about a man named Daniel. So Daniel is a mid-level manager living in Manchester.
Okay, Daniel in Manchester.
Yeah. And for 5 consecutive years, Daniel made a firm, passionate New Year's resolution that this was going to be the year he finally got into peak physical shape.
I think we all know a Daniel. I have definitely been Daniel.
Same here.
So it's January 1st. He's fueled by that exhilarating burst of resolve. He buys the expensive gym gear, signs up for the membership, and he's riding high.
Indeed. For the first 2 weeks, he is a machine. He is operating on that feeling of being invincible. But we have to look at what happens when the neurochemical high wears off, because by week 3, the reality of a Manchester winter sets in.
Oh, yeah, those winters are tough.
It is freezing cold. It is pitch black at 6 a.m. when his alarm goes off.
And his motivation begins to dissipate.
Yes.
Oh, that's another great vocabulary word for our listeners. Dissipate. It means to gradually disappear or fade away, kind of like morning fog vanishing when the sun hits it. So it wasn't that Daniel had this dramatic, explosive failure. His drive just slowly dissipated into thin air.
Specifically, he hits the snooze button once, then he rationalizes it, saying, I'm just tired today, I'll go tomorrow.
We've all been there.
His gym bag stays in the closet, the dopamine is gone. And Daniel finds himself doing what he has done for the last 4 years, quietly abandoning his grand plan without even telling anyone, feeling a deep sense of hidden shame.
And the tragic part is, Daniel probably blames his character. He thinks he's just lazy. But what's actually happening neurologically? Like, why did he fail?
He failed because he was relying on a finite resource to do an infinite job.
A finite resource.
Yes. Finite, meaning limited in amount or supply. It has a strict endpoint. Willpower and motivation are finite resources. Psychologists refer to this as ego depletion. Every time you make a decision, resist a temptation, or force yourself to do something difficult, you drain that tank.
So by the time Daniel wakes up, deals with his kids, commutes in traffic, and handles stressful meetings at work, his tank is completely empty.
Without a doubt, you cannot use a finite resource to power the infinite task of staying healthy for the rest of your life. Motivation is a wonderful spark. It gets the engine going.
Right.
But you cannot drive a car purely on sparks. You need an actual engine. In human behavior, that engine is a system.
But wait, I have to admit, building a system sounds incredibly unglamorous. It sounds like something an accountant does, not something that leads to a vibrant, exciting life.
It is entirely unglamorous. And that is the secret. Researchers who study long-term behavior change constantly point out that successful people rely on boring, repeatable structures. A system is the quiet routine that keeps you moving forward on a Tuesday morning in November when it is pouring rain and your motivation is absolutely zero.
So the shift we need to make isn't about watching more motivational videos on YouTube. It's moving away from the question, how do I get more motivated? To asking, how do I design my life so I don't need to rely on motivation at all?
That is the ultimate paradigm shift. But to design that system, we first have to completely change what we are aiming at. Which brings us to a fascinating psychological concept, the difference between wanting a specific outcome and wanting a specific identity.
Identity over outcome. I feel like this is where society really leads us astray. Everything we are sold is outcome-based.
Oh, completely.
Lose 20 pounds in 30 days, make $1 million by age 30. It's all focused entirely on the end result.
And on the surface, those sound like perfectly reasonable, even positive goals. But the fatal flaw with outcome-based habits is the nature of results themselves. Results are agonizingly slow. They are uneven. Day to day, your progress is often entirely invisible to the naked eye.
Oh, absolutely. You can eat nothing but grilled chicken and broccoli for 2 solid weeks, feel miserable, step on the bathroom scale, and the number hasn't moved a single ounce. The frustration is overwhelming.
That gap, the dark, frustrating space between your hard daily effort and the visible long-term reward, is known as the valley of disappointment. That is where outcome-based habits go to die.
Wow, the valley of disappointment.
Yeah. If your only reason for suffering through a workout is to see a different number on a scale and the scale doesn't move, your brain rationally asks, why are we doing this? And you quit.
So an identity-based habit flips the script. Instead of asking, what do I want to achieve? You start asking, who do I want to become?
Yes. Instead of saying, I want to lose 20 pounds, you start asking yourself throughout the day, what would a healthy person do in this situation? Instead of saying, I want to write a best-selling novel, you ask, what does a writer do every single day?
I can hear our listeners thinking, that sounds nice, but it's a bit abstract. It feels a bit philosophical, right?
It does sound a bit abstract at first, but its application is remarkably concrete. Because every single time you act in a way that aligns with this desired identity, you are basically casting a vote for the kind of person you believe yourself to be.
Cast a vote. Let's highlight that idiom for our advanced learners. Usually you cast a vote in a political election. You put your ballot in a box to choose a leader. But figuratively, it means taking an action that strongly supports an idea or a belief.
Spot on. So if you choose to drink a glass of water instead of a soda with lunch, you aren't just saving 100 calories. That's the outcome mindset.
Right.
In the identity mindset, you are casting a vote that reinforces the internal belief, I am someone who takes care of my body.
There's a brilliant case study I read about a woman named Priya that perfectly illustrates this. So Priya is a nurse working grueling night shifts at a large hospital in Toronto.
Oh, night shifts are brutal on the system.
Yeah, completely brutal. And because of her chaotic schedule, her sleep was a disaster. She was constantly exhausted, and for years, she tried to fix it by chasing a specific outcome. Her mantra was always, I need to get 8 hours of sleep.
And that outcome-based goal failed her repeatedly. It failed because the concept of 8 hours of sleep was entirely abstract, meaning it existed merely as a concept, something disconnected from her immediate reality.
Right. When she came home exhausted at 8 a.m., with the sun shining and her phone buzzing, the abstract idea of 8 hours wasn't powerful enough to stop her from doom scrolling on social media for 2 hours.
But then Priya completely reframed her approach. She abandoned the outcome and shifted to identity. She started telling herself, I am a protector of my own rest because my patients' lives depend on my alertness.
That is a phenomenal, profound shift.
Yeah.
Notice what happened there. She took a tedious, annoying chore, forcing herself to put her phone away and go to sleep in broad daylight, and transformed it into a core matter of her professional integrity.
Exactly.
Suddenly, putting on a sleep mask wasn't a strict punishing rule. It was simply what a dedicated life-saving nurse would naturally do.
This perfectly explains why strict diets always crash, but identity shifts actually endure.
Endure. There's a great C1 word. Endure. To last over a long period of time, especially through hardship or difficulty, habits built on identity endure because they remove the internal friction.
They endure because the psychological conflict disappears entirely. Consider the classic example of a slice of chocolate cake at an office party.
Okay, my favorite kind of party.
Right. But if your internal identity is, I'm a person with a sweet tooth who is currently on a strict diet, then sitting in front of that cake is a literal battle. You have to use your finite willpower to resist your own nature.
You're just white-knuckling it, sweating, staring at the frosting.
Exactly. You are fighting yourself. But if your identity has genuinely shifted to, I am someone who fuels my body with nutritious food, the slice of cake simply doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't align with the story you tell about who you are. It's not that you are using sheer grit to resist temptation. It's that the temptation doesn't feel relevant to your sense of self anymore.
I love that. But I have to push back here because I think a lot of people will be skeptical. Like, am I just supposed to stand in front of my bathroom mirror tomorrow, look myself in the eye, and declare, I am an Olympic athlete, and magically my habits will align?
Yeah.
That feels a bit like delusional brainwashing.
That is a very valid critique. And no, you absolutely cannot brainwash yourself with empty affirmations. Identity does not shift overnight, and your brain is too smart to be tricked by a lie.
Yeah, my brain would definitely call me out on that.
Oh, definitely. If you stand in the mirror and say you are a marathon runner, but you haven't run a mile in 5 years, your brain will reject that statement as false. The psychology is clear here. Identity is built the exact same way trust is built between two human beings.
Meaning you have to earn it.
You have to earn it through undeniable evidence, through many small, consistent actions repeated over a long timeline. You don't become a runner by buying expensive shoes. You become a runner by lacing up those shoes and jogging for 10 minutes on the days you don't really feel like it.
Wow.
You do that over and over until one day, without any grand announcement, running has simply become a factual part of who you are. The repeated actions provide the undeniable evidence that rewires the underlying belief.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So if our identity requires this steady stream of daily actions as evidence, how do we actually construct those actions? Like, how do we build these systems so we actually do the thing instead of just thinking about doing the thing? This brings us to the actual neurological architecture of a habit. We need to talk of the habit loop.
Yes. To deliberately build a system, you have to understand the fundamental mechanics running behind the scenes in your brain. Neuroscientists have spent decades mapping this out, particularly observing a part of the brain called the basal ganglia.
The basal ganglia.
Right, and they found that every single habit, whether it's running every morning or biting your nails every time you get nervous runs on a 4-step loop, the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward.
Let's break those down, because understanding this is like getting the source code to your own brain. So the first step is the cue. The cue is the trigger. It is a piece of information that alerts your brain that a potential reward is nearby.
Right. And a cue can literally be anything in your environment. It could be olfactory, like the smell of fresh baked bread when you walk past a bakery. It could be visual, like the red notification badge on your smartphone.
Oh, I hate that red badge.
It's powerful, though. It could even be an internal emotional state, like a sudden spike of anxiety or just the clock striking 3:00 p.m.
What I find so fascinating about this is that a cue by itself is completely neutral. A smartphone lighting up is just light passing through glass. It has no inherent meaning.
Absolutely neutral. But human brains are pattern recognition machines. Over time, your brain learns to associate that specific neutral cue with a specific reward. And that learned association gives birth to the second stage of the loop, the craving.
The craving is the motivational force. It's the itch you need to scratch.
And here's a crucial nuance that most people miss. You do not actually crave the habit itself. You crave the change in state that the habit delivers.
Wait, really?
Yeah. When your phone buzzes, you aren't craving the physical sensation of swiping your thumb across a piece of glass. You are craving the feeling of social connection or the momentary escape from a boring task. A smoker doesn't crave inhaling burning tar. They crave the brief wave of relaxation and dopamine it represents.
That is such a powerful distinction. Because if you can identify what you are actually craving, say, stress relief rather than a cigarette, you can start looking for healthier ways to satisfy that exact same craving.
Indeed. Once you feel that craving, you are pushed into the third stage, which is the response. This is the actual behavior. If you pick up the phone, you smoke the cigarette, you eat the donut.
And finally, the response delivers the reward. The reward provides that hit of satisfaction, the relief from the craving. And neurologically, that reward closes the loop. It teaches your brain, hey, that action solved our problem. Next time we see that exact same cue, let's run this exact same program again.
And this four-step loop is constantly running in the background of our lives, automating as much as possible to save cognitive energy. But here is the critical, fundamental mistake that almost everyone makes when trying to break a bad habit. They focus all their energy on suppressing the response while completely ignoring the cue and the craving.
I am so guilty of this. Let's say I'm trying to stop checking my phone while I'm doing deep work. I will tell myself, I am going to be disciplined. But I leave my phone sitting face up right next to my keyboard. It buzzes, the screen lights up, and I just stare at it, using all my mental energy to fight the urge to pick it up.
Which is an incredibly exhausting way to live. You are fighting an uphill battle.
An uphill battle, a fantastic idiom. It means a very difficult struggle that requires a massive, sustained amount of effort, much like trying to run up a steep, muddy hill.
It is an uphill battle because the cue, the buzzing, glowing phone, is still firing directly into your visual field. That cue is constantly triggering the craving. Your brain is screaming for the dopamine, and you are using your fragile, finite willpower to forcibly block the response. A much more intelligent strategy is to redesign your interaction with the loop itself.
There's an amazing real-world example of this with a guy named Marcus, a software developer living in Austin, Texas. So Marcus realized he was compulsively opening social media apps on his phone 50, 60 times a day.
Wow.
Yeah, and his cue was even the slightest hint of boredom while waiting for code to compile.
Instead of relying on sheer discipline to fight the response, Marcus decided to target the cue. He made the cue significantly harder to notice and act upon. He took all of his social media apps off his phone's main home screen. He put them into a folder. Then he put that folder on a secondary page, essentially burying the apps 3 taps deep.
He managed to disrupt his automatic loop. To disrupt means to interrupt or interfere with a normal, highly practiced process.
By adding those extra physical taps, Marcus bought himself a few crucial seconds of conscious thought. When he mainlessly unlocked his phone out of habit, the colorful app icons weren't immediately visible. That tiny bit of added friction gave his prefrontal cortex, the logical part of his brain, just enough time to catch up and say, wait, why am I opening this? I don't actually want to look at this right now.
And what's brilliant is that you can reverse engineer this logic to build good habits.
Exactly.
Like, if you want to build a habit of reading before bed instead of watching TV, you shouldn't keep your book tucked away on a shelf across the room. You should take the book and place it directly on your pillow when you make your bed in the morning. That way, the physical book appears precisely at the moment you need it.
You want to make the cues for your positive habits glaringly obvious.
Glaringly. That is a strong adverb.
It is. It means very obviously or noticeably, almost aggressively so, like a glaring spotlight shining in your eyes. If your goal is to drink more water, don't keep your water bottle in your backpack. Keep a brightly colored full glass of water sitting glaringly in plain sight right next to your computer monitor. Make good cues glaringly obvious and make bad cues invisible. It is a quiet, subtle strategy, but it reshapes your daily behavior far more effectively than trying to summon motivation.
Okay, so we've got the loop figured out. We are manipulating the cues. But here's where it gets really interesting for me. What about the actual size of the action itself? If we're trying to establish a brand new positive habit loop, how big or ambitious should that response actually be?
The scientific answer to that question is one of the most counterintuitive truths in all of behavioral psychology.
Counterintuitive, meaning it goes entirely against what your common sense or natural intuition would expect.
Exactly. Human nature dictates that big, life-changing goals require big, dramatic actions. If you decide you want to get fit, your brain immediately visualizes you sweating through a brutal hour-long boot camp at the gym.
Yep, that's what I picture.
Right. If you want to start a meditation practice, you picture yourself sitting in perfect, unbroken silence for 45 minutes. If you want to write a screenplay, you imagine waking up at 4 a.m. to pound out 10 pages before breakfast.
And those images are incredibly seductive. They make us feel productive just thinking about them. But the reality is, for most people with jobs and families and stress, setting those massive initial expectations is just a guaranteed recipe for burning out by day 12.
Because you are demanding too much from your neurological system too soon. The alternative approach, and the one that consistently works in clinical studies, is to scale the habit down until it is absurdly small. And I mean genuinely embarrassingly small.
We were talking about the famous 2-minute rule. The principle that any new habit you want to start should be scaled down until it takes less than 2 minutes to complete.
Yes. So instead of aiming for a 30-minute workout, your entire goal for the day is to do one single push-up. Instead of 45 minutes of meditation, your goal is to take one deep, mindful breath. Instead of writing 10 pages, your absolute daily goal is to write 2 sentences.
I'll be honest, if my goal is to get ripped and strong, doing one single push-up feels entirely useless. It feels silly. I can hear people saying, why even bother?
It absolutely feels silly. But you have to understand, this is not about permanently lowering your ambitions in life. It is about respecting a fundamental psychological law. You must completely separate the establishment of a habit from the scaling of a habit.
Establishing versus scaling, that's a powerful concept.
When you are in the infant stages of a new behavior, your primary objective is not to get impressive physical results. Your only objective is to show up consistently enough that the behavior becomes automated in the basal ganglia. You are trying to overcome what physicists and psychologists call inertia.
Inertia. That is a beautiful crossover vocabulary word. In physics, inertia is the tendency of a physical object to stay at rest unless a powerful force acts upon it. In human psychology, it's our deep natural resistance to change. It's that heavy gravitational pull that keeps you glued to the sofa watching Netflix when you know you should be working out.
Overcoming that initial inertia is the hardest part of any task. Getting off the couch is harder than the workout itself. But once the habit is established and wired into your brain's daily routine, scaling it up, transitioning from 1 push-up to 20 push-ups becomes vastly easier because you are no longer fighting the intense, draining friction of starting from 0 every single day.
The analogy that always clicks for me is starting a car in the dead of winter in a snowy climate.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right. If it is freezing outside, you don't turn the key and immediately stomp your foot on the gas pedal to hit 60 miles an hour. If you do that, you will literally destroy the engine. You have to turn the key, let the engine idle, let the oil warm up and circulate through the system. You start incredibly small to protect the machinery.
That is a wonderful analogy. Too many people try to hit the ground running with their new habits. That's a common idiom meaning to start a new project with immediate, intense energy and maximum speed. But hitting the ground running is actually the exact opposite of what we want to do when building sustainable habits. We want a gentle, absurdly small start.
There's a perfect story that illustrates this, featuring Sophia, a university student studying in Madrid. So Sophia desperately wanted to build a consistent exercise habit to manage her academic stress. But she had failed time and time again because she kept making these grand, ambitious plans to spend an hour at the university gym every afternoon.
She was fighting too much inertia, so she decided to apply the absurdly small approach. She created a new rule for herself that was almost laughably modest. Her entire goal for the day, the only thing she required of herself to consider the day a success, was to put on her workout clothes, step out of her front door, and walk to the end of her driveway. That was the finish line.
And the amazing detail here is that on some days when she was totally exhausted from exams, she genuinely did stop right there. She walked to the end of the driveway, turned around, went back inside, and took her shoes off.
And crucially, she logged that as a victory, because she successfully executed the established habit loop. But human nature, being what it is, more often than not, once Sophia was already outside, already wearing her running shoes, already breathing the fresh air, her brain would say, well, the hardest part is over. I've already overcome the inertia. I might as well jog to the end of the street.
And within 2 months, without ever consciously making a stressful, willpower-draining decision to exercise harder, she found herself happily jogging 3 miles 3 times a week.
Which highlights one of the most profound psychological truths we will discuss today. Frequency builds identity much faster than magnitude does.
Let that sink in. Frequency over magnitude.
Without a doubt. Think about the identity shift. Someone who does just one single push-up every day for 60 consecutive days has, in a very real neurological sense, become a person who exercises daily. Their self-image has fundamentally shifted.
Oh, yeah.
Conversely, someone who goes to the gym, does an agonizing 90-minute workout twice in January, and then quits for the rest of the year. That person has not changed their identity. The story you tell yourself about who you are is shaped by how frequently you show up, not how intensely you perform on any isolated day.
So we figured out how to shrink the habit down so it's easy for our brains. But we don't live in a vacuum. What happens when the physical room we are sitting in is actively fighting against us? This brings us to a concept that completely changed how I look at my house environment design.
If we accept that motivation is flaky and that our willpower is a finite tank that drains as the day goes on, what tools do we have left to ensure we do the right thing? Behavioral research continually points away from our internal minds and toward our external physical environment. People who successfully maintain healthy habits for decades rarely possess superhuman discipline.
Which is such a relief to hear, honestly.
It really is. What they do possess is a proactive approach to their surroundings. They have quietly, strategically engineered their environments so that the desired behavior naturally becomes the path of least resistance.
Path of least resistance. That is an excellent idiom. It means the easiest option available, the choice that requires the least amount of physical or mental effort. Water always flows down a mountain via the path of least resistance. And apparently, human behavior does the exact same thing.
It absolutely does, and this is rooted in evolutionary biology. Our brains are hardwired for caloric conservation. In ancient times, wasting energy could mean starvation. So today, your brain still constantly calculates the energy cost of every action. This cost is what we call friction. Think of friction as an invisible tax placed on every single action you take. The more steps, decisions, or physical effort required to do something, the higher the friction tax. And the higher the tax, the less likely you are to do it.
But the reverse is also true. The fewer steps required, the lower the friction tax, the more likely the behavior becomes. It almost happens automatically.
Let's look at a fascinating contrast regarding two different households that both make the exact same New Year's resolution. They both want their families to eat more fresh fruit.
Okay, household number 1. In this home, they buy a bunch of healthy apples and oranges, but they put them in the crisper drawer at the very bottom of the refrigerator. The drawer is hidden behind leftover containers and jars of mayonnaise. To eat an apple, someone has to actively remember the fruit is there, open the heavy fridge door, bend down, move the leftovers, open the drawer, take the apple out, and wash it. That is a massive amount of friction.
Exactly. Now consider household number 2. They buy the exact same fruit, but the moment they get home, they wash it and place it in a beautiful, open, wooden bowl directly on the kitchen counter. It is highly visible the moment anyone walks into the room. The internal desire to eat healthier is identical in both homes, but the behavioral outcomes will be vastly different.
I was reading a case study about Elena, a mother of 2 living in Chicago, who experienced this firsthand. She desperately wanted her family to snack on healthier foods, but for years, she would buy expensive organic fruit, put it in that bottom fridge drawer, and watch it quietly rot week after week. Meanwhile, her Her kids were constantly grabbing bags of potato chips off the low kitchen counter.
Elena realized that lecturing her kids about nutrition wasn't working. It was an uphill battle. So she changed the architecture of the room. She didn't try to increase their willpower. She manipulated the friction. She moved the washed fruit to the center island to make it conspicuous.
Conspicuous. A great C1 adjective means easily noticeable, standing out, so it's clearly visible and impossible to ignore.
She made the healthy choice conspicuous and incredibly convenient. Then she took the bags of chips and moved them to a high shelf in the pantry. A shelf so high that her children literally needed to go to the garage, get a step stool, and bring it to the kitchen just to reach the junk food.
That is brilliant. She added a massive friction tax to the bad habit.
And her family's behavior changed almost overnight. Nobody's willpower magically improved. Her kids didn't suddenly care about their cardiovascular health. The environment simply shifted the default behavior. The default is the automatic option that occurs when no active, conscious decision is made. When the kids walked in hungry, the default was now apples, not chips.
And this principle is just as powerful for the habits we want to break, isn't it? If you want to stop doom scrolling on your phone in bed, don't rely on your tired, ego-depleted brain at 11:00 p.m. to resist the urge. Just take your phone charger and plug it into the wall in the kitchen.
Or if you are trying to cut back on drinking alcohol in the evenings, don't keep a fully stocked, beautifully lit wine rack in your living room where it can constantly tempt you. To tempt means to attract someone toward doing something, often something unwise. If the alcohol isn't physically in the house, the friction required to put your shoes on, get in the car, and drive to the store at 8 p.m. is usually high enough that your brain will decide it's just not worth the effort, and you'll drink tea instead.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a profound shift in how we approach self-improvement. We are moving away from reactive willpower, trying to fight temptation in the moment, and moving toward proactive architecture. We are designing the room in advance to make the right choices inevitable.
It is a vastly more compassionate and sustainable way to live. You stop fighting yourself and start letting your environment do the heavy lifting.
So, environment design handles our physical space perfectly. It puts the fruit on the counter. But what about our time? What about our busy, chaotic daily schedules? How do we actually remember to do these new, absurdly small habits when we are rushing out the door for work, dropping kids off, and answering emails?
This brings us to a time management technique that leverages neurology, called habit stacking. Habit stacking is a remarkably elegant strategy for integrating new behaviors into an already packed, overwhelming schedule. It involves taking a fragile new habit that you want to build and securely attaching it to a robust old habit that is already firmly established in your daily routine.
The formula for this is brilliant in its simplicity. It goes like this. After current habit, I will new habit.
For example, after I pour my morning cup of coffee, I will write down 3 things I am grateful for, or after I finish brushing my teeth at night, I will do 10 air squats, or after I sit down at my office desk in the morning, I will immediately review my top 3 priorities for the day before opening my inbox.
Why is this specific formula so incredibly effective for our brains?
Because it completely removes the need for your brain to search for a new cue. We talked earlier about the habit loop needing a trigger. Well, creating a new trigger from scratch is hard. But with habit stacking, a reliable, deeply ingrained trigger already exists. It is deeply embedded in the rhythm of your day, and it requires absolutely zero extra thought or memory on your part. Neurologically, you are taking advantage of synaptic pruning. You are wiring a new neural pathway directly into a superhighway that already exists.
Because things like brushing your teeth, taking a shower, or making coffee have already become second nature.
Second nature. Yes, a fantastic idiom. When a behavior is second nature, it means it is so highly practiced and ingrained that it feels completely automatic. You don't need to put a calendar alert on your phone to remind you to brush your teeth. So by linking a new behavior directly to that existing cue, you are essentially hitching a free ride on a habit loop that is already running smoothly on autopilot.
It's like jumping onto a train that's already moving at 60 miles an hour instead of trying to push a stationary train down the tracks using your own brute strength.
Spot on.
I was reading a great story about a guy named James, a father of 3 living in Denver, who used this to change his life. James really wanted to start a daily gratitude practice to help with his anxiety. He genuinely wanted to do it, but his mornings with 3 young kids were so chaotic that he kept forgetting.
James was treating the gratitude practice as an isolated, standalone task. which meant it was constantly getting lost in the chaos of making breakfast and finding lost backpacks. His breakthrough happened when he decided to stack it onto something that was absolutely unshakable in his routine brewing his morning coffee.
He made a strict rule. Before he was allowed to take the first sip of his coffee, he had to write down one single thing he was grateful for on a small sticky note right there next to the coffee maker.
And the result. A decade later, that ritual is still perfectly intact. Now, it's not because James is a superhero whose motivation stayed high for 10 straight years. It's because the physical coffee maker itself quietly became an unwavering daily reminder. The smell of the coffee became the cue for gratitude.
This concept of stacking also shows us how these small, absurdly tiny changes compound over time.
Compound is a crucial verb here. We often hear it in finance compound interest, where money grows exponentially because the interest earns its own interest. Applied to human behavior, it means increasing gradually through combined effects over a long period. A single absurdly small habit, like writing one sticky note, rarely transforms your life in isolation.
When you chain them together, the magic happens.
Exactly. A chain of small, stacked habits, a morning routine, a quick lunchtime walk, an evening wind-down sequence. These begin to function almost like architectural scaffolding. They hold an entire structure of well-being in place. And the true beauty of this scaffolding is its resilience. If you miss one single link on a bad day, the whole chain doesn't collapse. The rest of the habits are anchored to sturdy, daily routines that are completely independent of your fluctuating moods.
I think humans secretly thrive on this kind of predictability. To thrive means to grow or develop successfully, to flourish. We might tell ourselves we want endless spontaneity and adventure, but our nervous systems actually thrive on rhythm.
We are fundamentally creatures of rhythm. Establishing a consistent daily or weekly rhythm is the true secret to long-term success. The person who gets up and exercises at 7 a.m. every single day, rain or shine, motivated or depressed, will vastly outperform the person who exercises whenever they feel inspired. Even if that second person does incredibly intense cinematic workouts, the consistent person wins over a decade. Consistency is the true engine of transformation, not intensity.
Okay, but we have to address the elephant in the room here. We've built these great systems, we've designed our physical environment to reduce friction, we are successfully stacking our habits. But what happens on the day we inevitably mess it all up? What happens when we get the flu, or there's a family crisis, or work just demands 80 hours a week and everything falls apart?
This is perhaps the most necessary and compassionate part of the entire framework. Because no matter how perfectly you design your life, every single person listening to this will eventually face a day where they break their streak. Disruption is inevitable. Life is chaotic.
And the psychological research gives us a really surprising and comforting truth about those disruptions. Missing a habit once, just one single time, has almost zero measurable long-term effect on your progress.
None at all. One missed day does not erase 60 days of physical cardiovascular adaptations, nor does it erase the neuroplasticity you've built in your brain. However, the data also clearly shows that missing a habit twice in a row dramatically increases the mathematical odds that you will abandon the habit entirely.
So the golden rule is never miss twice.
Indeed. It's not the first slip that ruins your progress. It is the punishing story we tell ourselves about that first slip.
Let's look at the vocabulary there. Punishing. When used as an adjective, it means an extremely harsh, severe, or unforgiving mindset. People hold this punishing all-or-nothing belief. If I am not executing my routine flawlessly, then I am failing completely.
This perfectionist mindset is deeply toxic to long-term growth. It takes one missed gym session because you had a flat tire and turns it into a catastrophic internal monologue. You tell yourself, well, I missed Tuesday, I've ruined my perfect streak, I've failed. What's even the point of going on Wednesday? I'll just start over next month.
And then you fall off the wagon. That's a very common, highly useful English idiom. To fall off the wagon means to return to a bad habit or give up on a positive one. It was originally used to describe someone who started drinking alcohol again after trying to quit. If you have that all-or-nothing mindset, one tiny bump in the road causes you to completely fall off the wagon.
It is an emotionally exhausting, fragile way to live. And functionally, it's just inaccurate. Hearing progress was never meant to be a perfectly straight, unbroken line ascending upwards. It is messy.
There's a story I was reading about a writer named Tom that really highlights this. Tom had maintained a really impressive daily writing habit for over a year. He wrote every single morning. But then, he faced a severe family emergency that completely disrupted his life. He was sleeping in a hospital waiting room, dealing with immense stress, and his routine was shattered for nearly 3 weeks. He didn't write a single word.
Under his old punishing mindset, Tom would have looked at that massive 3-week gap and decided the habit was completely destroyed. He would have felt that he needed an intimidating, grand, fresh start, telling himself, I need to take a month off to recover and I'll start writing again on January 1st.
And those delays so often stretch into forever. You wait for the perfect time, and the perfect time never arrives.
They do. But this time, Tom adopted the never miss twice principle, adapted for his long disruption. He showed himself some necessary radical compassion for the missed weeks. He recognized that the disruption was entirely outside of his control. And on the very first day that the emergency settled down and he finally had a spare 10 minutes at home, what did he do?
He didn't try to write a 10-page essay to make up for lost time. He didn't punish himself. He sat down and wrote just 2 sentences.
He wrote 2 sentences, closed his laptop, and moved on with his day without any dramatic self-criticism or guilt. He used the concept to simply get back on track.
Get back on track. Another essential idiom, meaning to return to the proper plan or routine after a delay or mistake. It comes from the idea of a train that was derailed being carefully lifted and put back on the rails.
Right. And the reason Tom's approach works so well is that it reframes a lapse. Instead of seeing a missed week as a complete disaster or a moral failure, you view it merely as data. It's just information. Everyone gets sick. Everyone has to travel for work. Everyone faces unexpected chaos. The defining characteristic of people who maintain habits for decades is not that they live perfectly calm, uninterrupted lives. It is the speed and the gentleness with which they return to their systems after the chaos ends.
The experts also suggest lowering the bar dramatically on particularly hard days rather than skipping the habit entirely, right?
This is crucial for maintaining that identity we talked about earlier. Let's say your normal routine is a 45-minute run, but you have had a brutal, emotionally draining day at the office. You are exhausted to your bones. The instinct is to skip the run entirely.
Right, because you mentally cannot handle the full 45 minutes.
But the smarter choice is to put on your shoes and jog around the block for just 5 minutes. Now, is the physical cardiovascular benefit of a 5-minute jog very high? No, admittedly, it is negligible. But the psychological benefit, the impact on your self-image, is enormous.
Because you are still casting that vote.
Exactly. You are maintaining the identity. You are reinforcing the deep internal belief, I am the type of person who shows up even when the day has been incredibly hard. And that preserved identity is exactly what will carry you through the next difficult stretch of life.
So getting back on track and showing up on hard days takes a lot of mental flexibility. But you know what makes it infinitely easier to get back on track if the habit itself isn't sheer torture? Which brings us to a final, massively overlooked ingredient in all of this: enjoyment.
It is almost comical how often this ingredient is completely ignored in the self-improvement space. We have talked about complex systems and environment design and identity and resilience, but none of those brilliant strategies will save you if you actively hate what you are doing.
There is this pervasive, almost puritanical idea that healthy habits are supposed to be this grim, agonizing discipline that you just have to endure through gritted teeth. You have to eat the flavorless boiled chicken. You have to push through the grueling, boring treadmill run while staring at a blank wall. You must suffer today so you can benefit tomorrow.
And to be fair, pushing yourself does involve some short bursts of discomfort. Growth requires effort, it requires stepping outside your comfort zone, but there is a massive neurological difference between the satisfying discomfort of effort and genuine dread. A habit that you genuinely dread waking up and doing is an incredibly fragile habit. It might survive a highly motivated week in January, but it will absolutely not survive contact with a stressful month at work or a difficult year.
The people who maintain their habits for years don't have an endless tolerance for misery. They aren't martyrs. They have actually found a version of the healthy activity that they genuinely enjoy doing.
Specifically, they have shaped the activity to fit their actual personality, rather than trying to force their personality to fit someone else's idealized version of what is right.
I was reading about a woman named Hannah who went through exactly this. Hannah spent years trying to force herself to become a long-distance runner. Why? Because every fitness influencer she followed on social media swore that running at 5:40 a.m. was the ultimate elite way to stay fit and build discipline.
But Hannah absolutely hated running. She hated the impact on her knees. She hated the monotony of the pavement. She hated every single mile. She was forcing herself out the door purely out of a sense of societal obligation and guilt. And because she dreaded it so much, she would quit cold turkey every few months.
Cold turkey. That's a great highly descriptive English idiom. To quit something cold turkey means to stop a habit suddenly and completely rather than gradually reducing it. It's a tough, jarring way to quit anything.
She would quit cold turkey, sell her running shoes, and then she would sit there feeling like a total failure, blaming her own lack of discipline. She thought she was broken. But her breakthrough came when a friend convinced her to try something completely different, indoor rock climbing.
And the change was instant. She loved it. She loved the mental puzzle of figuring out where to put her hands and feet on the climbing route. She loved the supportive social community at the gym. And she loved the tangible feeling of progressing higher up the wall each week.
The revelation for Hannah was that she never actually lacked discipline. She wasn't lazy. The problem was simply a mismatch of personality. She had spent years trying to force a habit that simply did not resonate with who she was.
Resonate. To feel deeply meaningful or fitting to someone, it's like striking a tuning fork and feeling the vibration. Running didn't vibrate with Hannah's personality, but climbing did. So what does this all mean for us?
It means that the endless search for the perfect or optimal habit is a trap. It is a search in the wrong direction. There is no universally correct, scientifically perfect way to move your body or manage your stress or eat a healthy diet.
There's only the version that actually fits into the reality of your specific life.
Yes, a habit built around what society says you should enjoy is incredibly fragile. But a habit built around what you actually enjoy is remarkably durable in the long run.
In the long run, over an extended period of time.
Because in the long run, on your darkest, hardest days, when your motivation is zero and your willpower is depleted, you won't return to the gym out of a grim sense of obligation. You will return to it because some core part of you genuinely wants to be there, doing an activity that brings you joy.
This has been a truly incredible journey through the hidden mechanics of human behavior. Let's summarize everything we have unpacked today, because we've covered a lot of ground. We started by throwing out the myth that motivation is the key to success, and replaced it with the quiet, boring, but unstoppable power of reliable systems.
We learned to stop obsessing over outcome-based goals, like staring at the scale hoping to lose 20 pounds, and instead focus entirely on identity-based habits, constantly asking ourselves, what would the type of person I want to become do in this exact moment?
We looked under the hood at the neuroscience of the habit loop, the cue, craving, response, and reward, and realized that manipulating the cue in our environment is much smarter than relying on sheer willpower to fight the response. We learned the absolute necessity of starting absurdly small, using the 2-minute rule to master the art of simply showing up and overcoming inertia.
We discussed the invisible tax of friction and how proactive environment design, like putting washed fruit conspicuously on the counter and burying distracting apps, makes good choices the path of least resistance.
We talked about hitching a ride on existing routines through habit stacking, creating a sturdy scaffolding that holds our lives together even when things get chaotic. We learned to handle our inevitable failures with radical grace, adopting the never miss twice rule, and treating our lapses as useful data rather than moral disasters.
And finally, we highlighted the critical importance of genuine enjoyment, ensuring that the habits we choose actually resonate with our unique personalities, making them durable for the long run.
And of course, along the way, we've deeply explored some fantastic C1 level English vocabulary and idioms, from feeling invincible to avoiding an uphill battle, all designed to help you communicate these complex psychological concepts with natural, native-level fluency.
It has been a deeply rewarding conversation. And as we conclude our time together today, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought to carry with you as you take off your headphones and step back into your daily routine. Based on everything we have discussed about identity, systems, and overcoming that heavy pull of inertia, what is one absurdly small habit you could start today, not next Monday, not January 1st, but today, that would cast a single vote for the person you actually want to become?
That is the perfect question to reflect on as we wrap up. Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel for more deep dives in advanced English listening practice. Until next time, keep showing up, keep casting those votes, and take care.
I mean, the people with the most willpower actually use it the least. Which is, think about that for a second.
Right, it sounds totally backward.
It really does. Because we completely idolize people who seem to have this just, ironclad discipline. The types, the ones waking up at 4:30 in the morning to run.
Oh yeah, the relentlessly productive ones.
Exactly. The ones launching companies, the ones who seem completely immune to procrastination. We look at them and we just assume they have this massive internal reservoir of motivation that the rest of us somehow lack.
Yeah, like they were just born with a bigger gas tank.
Right. But the data tells a completely different story. So today, in this deep dive, we are looking at the actual psychological architecture of human drive.
And we are going to prove why trying to, motivate yourself is arguably the absolute worst, most inefficient way to actually get things done.
It is such a trap for so many people.
It really is a trap. And it's a trap built by a fundamental misunderstanding of our own neurology, honestly. We tend to treat motivation like it's the weather.
Like the weather. How so?
Like it's this atmospheric condition that just happens to us. You wake up, you sort of check your internal emotional forecast, and you think, oh, well, it's cloudy today, 0% chance of motivation.
Right. Because I can't tackle that complex project today.
Exactly. But in this deep dive, we are dismantling that entirely. We're going to look at why relying on raw willpower will inevitably cause you to fail.
Which is going to be a huge relief to hear, I think.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We're also going to explore the neurobiology of habit loops and unpack the hidden engines that actually govern behavior. Things like identity shifts, intrinsic reward mechanics, and environmental friction.
And we have to start right out of the gate with what the researchers in our source stack call the great reversal. Because, this completely shattered my own mental model of productivity.
It's a huge paradigm shift.
It really is. Because the standard cultural narrative that we are all fed is basically feel, then do. The assumption is that the emotion absolutely has to precede the action.
Right, you wait for the spark.
You wait for the spark, the fire, the inspiration. And only then can you take the first step. But the psychological reality is the exact opposite of that.
Precisely. The reality is do, then feel. Action frequently creates motivation, not the other way around.
Right.
And if you are convinced that action requires a baseline of motivation, then on the days you just don't feel like doing something.
Which, let's be honest, is going to be the vast majority of your days.
Exactly. Realistically, most days you won't feel like it. So you've given yourself this built-in, culturally sanctioned excuse to just remain paralyzed. You end up in this passive state of waiting.
And the research shows that waiting isn't just neutral, right?
No, not at all. Waiting, neurologically speaking, actually becomes its own deeply ingrained habit.
There was this fascinating case study I was reading in our research stack about a guy named Marcus.
Oh, the accountant.
Yeah, Marcus is a mid-level accountant, but for almost a decade, he's harbored this intense dream of transitioning into graphic design, and his cycle is just agonizingly familiar.
Every January, right.
Yeah. Every single January, he makes the resolution. This is the year I build my portfolio. And then he waits. He just waits for this massive rush of creative inspiration to carry him through the incredibly tedious early stages.
Because learning new software is awful.
It is. Learning in Adobe Illustrator, dealing with layers, making terrible art, and just feeling totally incompetent. He's waiting for inspiration to make that easy.
Right, because learning a new skill is highly uncomfortable. It generates a ton of cognitive friction. It is almost never intrinsically motivating in those first, say, 20 hours when you are acutely aware of how bad your output is.
Yeah, your taste is much better than your skills at that point.
Exactly. So Marcus is essentially waiting for inspiration to act as a psychological anesthetic for that discomfort.
A psychological anesthetic, wow.
But because that specific type of magical, pain-numbing inspiration just doesn't exist, the portfolio remains completely untouched. And it's crucial to note here, for you listening, Marcus isn't lazy.
Right, he isn't lacking ambition at all.
No, he is simply operating under completely broken theory of human behavior.
He's suffering from a massive effective forecasting error, isn't he? He is totally misjudging how he is going to feel in the future.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening.
He thinks doing the work is going to feel awful the entire time, and he thinks he needs to feel amazing to even start. But if we actually look at the neurochemistry of task initiation, dopamine isn't just freely floating around while you sit on the couch waiting.
No, dopamine is released upon forward action toward a recognized goal. It is a reward for movement. It is not a prerequisite for it.
That is so key.
What behavioral psychologists have found is that taking a microscopic action, even something as trivial as opening the design software and drawing one terrible circle, it forces a shift in your emotional and neurochemical state.
You take the physical action first.
Right. That completion of a microtask shifts the brain's chemistry slightly. You get a tiny hit of dopamine, you feel a fraction of a percent more capable.
And suddenly then, you actually feel the motivation to draw a second circle.
Exactly. The feeling of motivation arrived as a consequence of the behavior. It was the exhaust pipe, not the engine.
I love that. It's like waiting for motivation before you start is like refusing to put wood in a stove until it gets hot.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You know, you are demanding heat before combustion. It completely defies the laws of physics, and it totally defies the laws of psychology. You literally have to strike the match, light the kindling, and just suffer through the smoke for a minute.
Suffer through the friction.
Right. The heat, which is the motivation, is the byproduct of burning the wood.
That is the perfect mechanical analogy. You are generating the heat through the initial friction of action. If you can internalize that one mechanism, that you absolutely do not need to feel like doing something in order to physically move your body and start doing it, you eliminate about 80% of procrastination right there.
But hold on, let me push back here for a second. Because if action precedes motivation, and I just need to start, how do I get myself to take that very first action when I am completely, utterly paralyzed?
Well, what do most people do?
The natural instinct for most of us is to just force it, right? We try to grit our teeth, white-knuckle the steering wheel, and push through using sheer brute force willpower. Because we live in a culture that absolutely fetishizes willpower.
We really do.
Yeah.
And that leads us directly into one of the most hotly debated, genuinely fascinating areas of modern psychology.
Yeah.
The willpower battery myth.
The battery myth. Okay, let's get into this.
So for a long time, the prevailing theory in behavioral science was something called ego depletion.
Right, the idea that willpower is a finite resource, like a gas tank that drains.
Exactly. The classic foundational study for this was done back in the late 1990s by Roy Baumeister. And it's legendary. They brought hungry college students into a room filled with the smell of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, man.
They sat them at a table. On the table was a plate of the warm cookies, and next to it, a bowl of raw radishes.
Which is just deeply cruel. Raw radishes.
It is deeply cruel. So half the students were told to eat the cookies, the other half were told they could only eat the radishes, and they had to actively resist the cookies.
While smelling them in a small room, just torturous.
Yes. But after this torturous period, both groups were given a puzzle to solve. Now, what the researchers didn't tell them was that the puzzle was completely impossible to solve.
Oh, wow. So they just wanted to see how long they would last.
Yeah, exactly. They just wanted to measure how long the students would persist before giving up in frustration. The students who got to eat the cookies, they worked on the puzzle for an average of about 19 minutes.
Okay, almost 20 minutes.
Right. But the students who had to exert willpower to eat the radishes and resist the cookies, they gave up after just 8 minutes.
Less than half the time, because they had supposedly drained their willpower battery resisting the cookies.
That was the conclusion, yeah. Baumeister theorized that self-control is a general overarching resource. So every time you make a decision all day long,
Like what to wear or navigating traffic.
or holding your tongue in a meeting, resisting a cookie, you're drawing from the same exact pool of mental energy. So by 8:0 p.m., your battery is dead, which is supposedly why you end up doom scrolling on your phone and eating a pint of ice cream.
Okay, but this is where it gets really interesting to me because I know that specific theory of ego depletion has been under pretty intense fire recently.
Yes, very intense fire.
I've read in the source material that it was one of the major casualties of the replication crisis in psychology. Like when other labs tried to run that radish and cookie experiment or variations of it, they just couldn't get the same results.
That's right.
So is the willpower battery just completely fake science? Are we totally throwing it out?
This is such a critical nuance. You are absolutely right about the replication issues. In recent years, massive meta-analyses like those led by Martin Hager found that the ego depletion effect was either significantly smaller than originally claimed or, in some rigorous tests, practically indistinguishable from zero.
Wow. Indistinguishable from zero.
Yeah. But we have to be really careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater here, because our lived subjective experience tells us that we absolutely do feel exhausted and lack self-control at the end of a long day.
Right, because if I've been making high-stakes decisions all day at work, I am absolutely not reading Tolstoy at 9 p.m. I am watching garbage television.
Exactly. So if it's not a literal biological battery draining of, glucose or energy, what is actually happening?
Right. What is the mechanism if the tank isn't actually empty?
The more accurate modernized understanding is presented by researchers like Michael Inslicht, who propose what's called the process model of depletion.
The process model.
Right. Under this model, it's not that you have run out of fuel, it's that your brain has actively shifted its priorities and reallocated its attention.
Reallocated how? Like to what?
So throughout the day, your brain engages in what they call have-to tasks. Labor, self-control, complex problem solving, all the stuff you have to do to function in society.
The responsible adult stuff.
Exactly. Over time, the brain, which is basically always trying to balance its cognitive load, starts to experience a shift in valuation. It literally stops valuing the rewards of have-to tasks and aggressively starts seeking out want-to tasks.
No, I see.
It seeks leisure, rest, immediate gratification. You don't lose the actual biological ability to exert self-control. Your brain simply withdraws the motivation to do so because it calculates that it's time to rest.
That is wild. So the tank isn't empty. The brain is just actively staging a strike.
Exactly. It's a motivational shift, not a resource depletion.
Yeah.
Think of Priya, a case study we saw in the notes of a nurse who works grueling 12-hour shifts.
Oh, right. The ER nurse.
Yeah. At the hospital. She is meticulous. She is calm under pressure, deeply disciplined, making life or death decisions. But she gets home and she completely falls apart.
She wants to read, she wants to meal prep, but she ends up collapsing on the couch and just scrolling social media for 3 hours.
And she probably feels immense guilt about that, thinking she's just a hypocrite or inherently lazy outside of work.
But under this process model, Priya isn't fundamentally broken, and she isn't out of some magical mental fuel.
No, her brain has just spent 12 grueling hours hyper-focused on have-to tasks. So when she walks through her front door, the brain aggressively shifts attention toward immediate, low-effort want-to tasks just to recover cognitive equilibrium.
And expecting to override that aggressive biological shift with raw willpower is just a losing battle.
It's completely futile long-term.
Which brings us right back to those highly disciplined people we talked about at the very beginning. If the 4:30 a.m. runners and the hyper-productive CEOs aren't just tapping into a bottomless well of willpower.
Which they aren't.
Right, and their brains are subject to the exact same valuation shifts as Priya's, then how on earth are they actually doing it day in and day out?
They do it by removing the prefrontal cortex from the equation almost entirely.
Okay, tell me more about that.
They don't use willpower. They rely on the basal ganglia. They rely on habits.
Okay, let's get into the neuroanatomy here. Because I feel like everyone throws around the word habit all the time, but I don't think we really appreciate the mechanical, structural shift that actually happens in the brain when a behavior becomes habitual.
It is a profound structural shift. When you are learning a new behavior, let's say, driving a manual transmission car for the very first time.
Oh, terrifying. Stalling out at every stoplight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your prefrontal cortex is heavily engaged. That's the part of the brain responsible for executive function, conscious thought, and willpower. It is highly, highly energy intensive.
Right.
But as you repeat the behavior over and over, a process called chunking occurs.
Chunking, which ties into that old saying, the neurons that fire together wire together.
Exactly. Hebbian learning. The sequence of actions gets physically wired into a cohesive neural circuit, and the control of that behavior literally migrates down into the basal ganglia.
And the basal ganglia is what exactly?
It's a much older, deeper, and vastly more energy-efficient part of the brain. The basal ganglia handles subconscious automatic behaviors.
So a habit is basically just an algorithm that your brain writes to save computing power.
That is brilliantly put, yes.
Yeah.
It's an energy-saving algorithm. And that algorithm runs on a very specific, unbreakable three-part loop. The cue, the routine, and the reward.
Cue, routine, reward.
Right. The cue triggers the basal ganglia to take over. The routine is the automatic behavior itself. And the reward tells the brain, yes, keep this algorithm saved for next time.
The research highlights this with a writer named Elena. And her story is so relatable. For years, she tried to write a novel using the prefrontal cortex.
Just trying to force it.
Yeah, she tried to consciously force herself to write for hours on Saturday mornings. She tried waiting for inspiration. She bought all the expensive screenwriting software.
And it never worked.
Never. Because the cognitive load of writing a novel was so incredibly high that her brain would immediately shift priorities to a want-to task. Like, she would end up cleaning the kitchen or checking emails instead of writing.
So what was her intervention? How did she bypass that prefrontal resistance?
She shrank the routine down to something so laughably small that the prefrontal cortex basically didn't view it as a threat.
I love that.
She committed to opening her laptop and writing for exactly 10 minutes. That's it. Not a chapter, not an hour. 10 minutes. And she tied it to a rigid cue. The very first sip of her morning coffee.
The coffee was the trigger.
The coffee was the trigger, and 10 minutes of typing was the routine.
And this is exactly why understanding the mechanism is so vital. By making the routine a mere 10 minutes, she dramatically lowered the activation energy required. She didn't need a massive surge of willpower to endure 10 minutes.
Right.
But here's the critical part. Once she took the physical action, what happened?
The great reversal. Action created motivation. Once she was typing, the friction was gone, the dopamine started flowing because she was moving toward a goal, and she frequently ended up writing for an hour or two anyway.
Right. But I can anticipate a major pushback here from you or the listener.
Oh, I definitely have a pushback. 10 minutes of writing isn't a habit. It's just a psychological trick you play on yourself to get started.
Okay, fair.
How does a 10-minute trick sustain a person for the 18 straight months it takes to actually finish a 300-page manuscript? Like, if the cue triggers the routine, what is the reward that solidifies the basal ganglia loop? Is it just the feeling of being done?
That is the pivotal question, because this is where the entire system can violently break down if you aren't careful. The reward is what wires the habit.
Right.
Now, a reward can be extrinsic, meaning something external, like money, praise, a piece of chocolate, or getting likes on a social media post. Or a reward can be intrinsic, the internal feeling of mastery, the joy of curiosity, the deep satisfaction of the work aligning with your core values.
And I'm guessing the data shows a pretty massive difference in how those two types of rewards affect long-term behavior.
It's night and day. There is a fascinating comparison in the data between two runners, Daniel and Aisha, that perfectly isolates this exact variable.
Let's talk about Daniel first.
So Daniel decides to get in shape because he has his sister's wedding coming up in 3 months. He wants to look good in a tailored suit, and he wants to impress his extended family.
This is pure, unadulterated, extrinsic motivation.
Totally. External deadlines, external validation. And it works temporarily. He trains intensely, he looks fantastic at the wedding, but what happens the Monday morning after the wedding?
He never goes back to the gym.
Not once.
The external trigger disappeared, so the behavior disappeared. The locus of causality was completely outside of him.
Exactly. Motivation, based purely on external validation, is incredibly brittle. It breaks the moment the reward is gone. Now look at Aisha. She has been running for 30 minutes every single morning for 5 years.
Wow, 5 years.
And she doesn't post her times on a fitness app. She doesn't run marathons or races. She runs simply because she fundamentally enjoys the neurochemical feeling of the run itself.
She loves the quiet time away from screens.
Right. Her reward is entirely intrinsic.
So intrinsic is durable and extrinsic is brittle. But, that seems fairly obvious, doesn't it? We all know we should do things for the love of it.
Sure, in theory.
But what happens if you take something you intrinsically love and you add an extrinsic reward to it? Because I was looking at the notes on something called the over-justification effect, and it absolutely melted my brain.
It is arguably one of the most counterintuitive findings in all of psychology. Because if intrinsic motivation is good, and extrinsic motivation works in the short term, you would logically assume that combining them would create a sort of super motivation.
Right. Like, if I love playing guitar in my bedroom and someone offers to pay me $100 an hour to play guitar, I should be the most motivated guitarist on the planet.
But cognitive evaluation theory proves the exact opposite. When you introduce a salient external reward to an inherently interesting activity, you frequently destroy the intrinsic motivation.
Explain the mechanism there. How does getting paid actually destroy the love of the game?
Let's look at the classic 1973 study by Lepper, Green, and Nisbet. They went into a preschool and identified children who naturally, intrinsically loved to draw.
Okay.
During free play, these kids would immediately run to the markers and paper, just totally unprompted. The researchers took these kids and divided them into groups. For one group, they showed the children a good player certificate with a gold seal and a blue ribbon.
Very fancy for a preschooler.
Very fancy. And they told them, if you draw a picture for us, you will get this certificate.
So they introduced a contract, a transactional reward.
Exactly. The kids drew the pictures, they got the certificates. A couple of weeks later, the researchers returned and observed the kids during free time without offering any rewards at all.
And what happened?
The children who had been contracted to draw for a reward showed a massive drop in interest. They spent significantly less time drawing than they had before the experiment even started.
Meanwhile, the kids who were just left alone kept drawing just as much as before.
Right. So why did this happen? It's due to something called the discounting principle.
The discounting principle.
Yes. The human brain is a highly sophisticated inference machine. It is constantly observing your own behavior to figure out your internal states. When the children were drawing for free, their brains inferred, well, I am doing this and nobody is forcing me or paying me, therefore I must inherently love drawing.
The locus of control was internal.
The moment the certificate was introduced.
The brain recalculates.
Exactly. It says, wait, I am doing this activity to get that gold ribbon. I am engaging in this behavior to secure an external asset. The activity subtly shifts from being play to being labor.
Wow.
The brain discounts the intrinsic interest because the extrinsic reward provides a perfectly logical alternative explanation for the behavior.
It completely overwrites the narrative.
It turns play into work.
Let's apply this to everyday life for you listening, because this has massive, massive implications. If I'm trying to build a reading habit and I tell myself, okay, every time I finish a difficult nonfiction book, I'm going to buy myself a $60 bottle of wine. Am I actually sabotaging myself?
You might be, yes.
Yeah. Or worse, parents who pay their kids $5 for every A they get on a report card. Are they literally destroying the child's natural curiosity and turning education into a mercenary transaction?
The data strongly suggests that, yes, you are playing a very dangerous game with those kids. External rewards are highly effective at prompting a behavior for the very first time. Like, if a child refuses to try broccoli, offering a small dessert as a bribe might be the literal only way to get the broccoli in their mouth.
Right.
But if you rely on that transaction continuously, the child will never learn to appreciate the taste of the broccoli. They will only view the broccoli as the painful obstacle standing between them and the ice cream.
So if we want durable, lifelong habits, if we want to be the Aisha who runs for 5 years or the Elena who writes a novel without needing a gold star, the motivation has to transition entirely away from external transactions.
It has to move inward.
It has to move into the deepest layer of human psychology. It has to become indistinguishable from your very sense of self. Which brings us to the ultimate engine of behavior change: identity.
Identity, yes. This shifts the conversation completely away from what we are doing and toward who we are. And when we talk about identity, we absolutely have to talk about cognitive dissonance.
Right. To understand why identity is so powerful, we have to look at how fiercely the human brain protects its self-concept. Cognitive dissonance is the psychological pain you feel when your actions contradict your beliefs or your identity.
Exactly. If you consider yourself an honest person and you tell a blatant lie, you feel extreme psychological discomfort. Your brain will immediately try to resolve that tension, usually by rationalizing the lie.
So how do we weaponize cognitive dissonance for positive behavior change? There is a story in the research about a man named Thomas that I think illustrates this flawlessly.
Thomas the smoker.
Yes, Tomas was a heavy smoker who had tried to quit 4 separate times over a decade. And every single time, he used the traditional, goal-oriented, willpower-heavy approach.
He was relying completely on the prefrontal cortex.
Exactly. He'd slap on a nicotine patch, grit his teeth, and engage in this exhausting daily internal negotiation. It's been a really stressful day at work. One drag won't hurt. I'll run an extra mile tomorrow to make up for it.
We've all been there with some habit.
Right. And because he was just trying to quit, his core identity was still that of a smoker. He was a smoker who was temporarily denying himself a cigarette. Unsurprisingly, the cognitive load was just too heavy, and he relapsed all 4 times.
Because every time he wanted a cigarette, he had to make a conscious decision not to have one. He had to drain that battery.
But on his 5th attempt, he fundamentally changed his cognitive framework. It wasn't about the patch or chewing gum anymore. He shifted his identity statement. He stopped saying, I am trying to quit.
What did he say instead?
He started telling his friends, his coworkers, and most importantly, his own brain, I don't smoke.
That phrasing is profoundly different.
I don't smoke. No, I can't. No, I'm trying not to. Just a cold, factual statement of identity. And that tiny linguistic shift changed the entire trajectory of his life. He quit permanently.
Let's break down the actual mechanism of why that worked. When Thomas identifies as a person who is trying to quit, the act of smoking a cigarette is a failure of a goal, sure, but it is not a violation of his identity.
Right.
But the moment he genuinely adopts the identity of a non-smoker, smoking a cigarette becomes a catastrophic threat to his self-concept. It would trigger massive cognitive dissonance.
It's the difference between breaking a rule and breaking yourself.
Exactly. A person who deeply identifies as a reader doesn't wake up and debate whether they should read today. They simply read, because to not read would be weird. It It would feel inauthentic.
A person who deeply identifies as a runner doesn't stare out the window on a freezing Tuesday morning and agonizingly weigh the pros and cons of going for a run. A runner runs. To stay inside would create more psychological friction than the physical friction of the cold weather.
Right. This reminds me of the concept of self-perception theory, originally proposed by Daryl Bem.
Okay, what is self-perception theory?
The idea that we figure out who we are by observing our own behavior. It's almost like an algorithmic weighting system. Every time you complete a tiny habit, every time Elena writes for 10 minutes or Aisha goes for a run, you aren't just crossing off a task.
You are casting a tiny psychological ballot for the person you want to become.
Yes.
Yeah.
One 10-minute writing session doesn't suddenly make you a novelist. But if you cast enough of those votes, day after day, the algorithmic weight of your identity shifts.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it. You are providing the brain with undeniable empirical evidence that this new identity is real.
You believe it to yourself.
You do. And once you cross that threshold, once you truly believe you are a writer, you don't need to generate motivation to write. The behavior just becomes the baseline default.
However, while hacking your identity and building basal ganglia habit loops is incredibly powerful internal work, we actually have a massive blind spot right now in this conversation.
We are ignoring the outside.
We are completely ignoring the most powerful, silent force that dictates human behavior every single day: environmental architecture.
Right. Because willpower and identity are internal engines. They require some level of upkeep and energy. But your physical and digital environment is working 204/7 relentlessly, either for you or against you.
And it operates on a principle that is so simple, it's almost frustrating: friction.
Friction is the invisible hand of behavioral economics. If you want to understand how powerful friction is, we can look at choice architecture, popularized by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, the whole idea of the nudge.
The nudge is so powerful.
There is a brilliant study, I believe it was done in the cafeteria at Google's headquarters, that perfectly illustrates this. The HR department wanted to encourage healthier eating habits among thousands of employees.
Now, what is the standard, ineffective way a corporation tries to change behavior?
They try to manufacture internal motivation. They send out a company-wide email about the dangers of high cholesterol. They put up laminated posters of a food pyramid in the break room.
They try to educate the prefrontal cortex.
Yes, hoping the employees will use willpower to choose a salad over a pizza.
Which completely ignores the reality that at 12:30 p.m., the employees are tired, stressed, and their brains are actively prioritizing immediate high-calorie rewards.
Right, so the behavioral scientists didn't send a single email. They didn't put up any posters at all. They simply altered the physical friction of the cafeteria.
What did they change?
They moved the healthy options, the salads, the fruit, the water bottles to eye level right at the front of the line. And they took the unhealthy options, the sodas, the heavy desserts, and moved them to the bottom shelf, or place them slightly further away, maybe behind an opaque glass door instead of a clear one.
Notice they didn't remove the junk food. They didn't mandate anything or ban anything.
No, they just added maybe 3 seconds of physical and cognitive friction to the unhealthy choice and removed friction from the healthy choice. And the results were staggering.
Caloric intake dropped. Water consumption skyrocketed.
And people gravitated toward the salads, all without a single drop of willpower being expended.
Because the environment became the motivation. This is exactly why relying on willpower to resist the junk food in your own pantry at 10:00 p.m. is a mathematical certainty for failure.
Yes.
If the cookies are in the cabinet, the friction required to eat them is almost zero. You just open the door. But if you engineer your environment so that there simply are no cookies in the house.
The friction required to eat a cookie now involves putting on pants, finding your keys, driving to the gas station, and buying them. You have made the healthy choice, not eating cookies, the path of absolute least resistance.
It is civil engineering for your life.
Yes, it's exactly like civil engineering. If a city wants cars to slow down in a school zone, putting up a sign that says, please be motivated to drive 15 miles per hour is completely useless. You are relying on the driver's willpower.
But if you build a giant physical speed bump in the road,
the driver doesn't need motivation. The physical environment forces the behavior. They have to slow down or ruin their suspension.
So practically speaking, for you listening, how do we build speed bumps for our bad habits and downhill slopes for our good ones?
You hack the friction. If you want to read before bed instead of looking at your phone, don't just say, I'll try harder. Leave the book physically resting on the center of your pillow so you literally have to move it to get into bed. You have removed the friction of finding the book.
And add friction to the phone.
Exactly. If you want to stop doom scrolling, don't just try to use willpower. Delete the social media apps off your phone entirely. Force yourself to open a web browser, type in the URL, and physically type out your password every single time you want to log in.
You are intentionally adding cognitive speed bumps.
And what I love most about this environmental approach is that it completely removes the moral shame from our failures.
Oh, absolutely.
We wrap so much guilt into productivity. I didn't work out. I'm just a lazy person. I ate the junk food. I have no discipline. But if we look at the data, it's not that you are inherently weak. It's that you have a design flaw in your personal architecture.
You engineered a living room that perfectly supports watching 4 hours of Netflix. Change the architecture, change the behavior.
It is deeply liberating to realize you can outsource your discipline to your environment.
However, we have to address the reality of difficult pursuits here.
Okay, what do you mean?
Because even if you have the perfect identity, even if your environment is beautifully engineered and your habit loops are tight, if you are pursuing something genuinely difficult like writing a book, losing 50 pounds, starting a business, you are inevitably going to hit a roadblock out in the wild. A point where quitting doesn't just feel like a temptation, it feels like the only logical option.
Yes, the wall. The marathoner's mind, the moment where your brain actively tries to shut you down.
The science behind the wall is fascinating, particularly when we look at the central governor theory proposed by Dr. Tim Noakes.
Explain the central governor theory, because this reframes how we view exhaustion entirely.
Traditionally, we thought that runners hit the wall at mile 18 or 20 because their muscles physically ran out of glycogen or they built up too much lactic acid. We thought it was a mechanical failure.
Muscles just gave out.
Right. But Noakes proposed that the brain actually acts as a central governor. Long before your muscles reach catastrophic failure, your brain calculates the rate of energy depletion, panics, and sends overwhelming signals of pain and fatigue to force you to stop.
Because the brain's primary evolutionary directive is just to keep you alive. And running 26 miles is, evolutionarily speaking, an incredibly dangerous, irrational thing to do.
Precisely. So the exhaustion isn't in the legs, it's a protective hallucination generated by the brain to conserve energy.
That is wild, a protective hallucination.
And this applies to cognitive exhaustion just as much as physical. When you are halfway through a massive, difficult project, your brain senses the massive energy expenditure and steps in to shut the operation down. And here's the truly dangerous part. The brain doesn't just send a signal that says, I am tired.
No, it leverages your own intellect against you.
It does.
There is a story of Robert running his first marathon at age 42. He hits mile 18, his central governor kicks in, and his brain starts giving him a highly persuasive PowerPoint presentation on why quitting is the most responsible thing he could possibly do.
What kind of arguments does his brain make in that moment?
It's terrifyingly smart. His internal monologue says, look, Robert, you already proved you could run 18 miles during training. That's a huge accomplishment. Nobody is going to think less of you for stopping now.
It sounds so reasonable.
Right. In fact, remember that slight twinge you felt in your knee last month? If you push through this, you might tear a ligament and need surgery. Think of your family. You need to stop now for your health.
The brain acts like a highly paid defense attorney presenting a watertight, logical case for why quitting is the morally and physically correct choice.
So how do you fight that? Because if you try to fight a logical PowerPoint presentation with vague, big picture motivation like, but I want to be a finisher, you are going to lose. Your willpower is already depleted.
The antidote, according to the psychological research, is a technique called shrinking the decision.
Shrinking the decision.
You do not debate the big picture. When Robert's brain tells him to quit the marathon, he doesn't think about the remaining 8 miles. Thinking about 8 more miles of agony is overwhelmingly massive. It gives the central governor all the evidence it needs to force a shutdown.
So what did he do?
He made a predetermined agreement with himself to shrink the cognitive horizon. He looked up, saw a mile marker about a half mile away, and told himself, I am not deciding whether to finish this marathon. I am only deciding to jog to that specific signpost, just that one sign. If I want to quit after that, I can.
Wow. He made the decision so microscopically small that it bypassed the central governor's panic response entirely.
Exactly. It required almost zero willpower to run just to the next sign. And once he hit the sign, he shrank the decision again, just to the water station, just to the next turn.
He wasn't relying on motivation. He was relying on a series of tiny, manageable micro-agreements with himself to buy momentum.
You just buy enough momentum to survive the biological panic attack. And this isn't just for runners. A writer hitting a block halfway through a book does this. I'm not writing a chapter today. I'm just opening the document and formatting the headers.
Or a person on a diet looking at a menu doesn't say, I have to eat perfectly for the rest of my life. They say, I am just making a healthy choice for this one specific meal. It's a brilliant hack against our own evolutionary biology.
It is. Now, up until this point, we have been looking at all of these mechanisms, habit loops, intrinsic rewards, identity, environmental friction, shrinking the decision on a strictly individual level, how a single person navigates their own psychology.
Right, personal productivity.
But what happens when we scale this up? How does this framework apply when you are a leader, a manager, or a parent, trying to navigate the psychology of an entire group of people?
This is where things seem to go spectacularly wrong in the corporate world. Because most managers drastically misunderstand human drive. They completely ignore everything we just talked about, and they rely on the corporate equivalents of raw willpower and token economies.
They rely on pep talks, aggressive deadlines, end-of-year bonuses, and gamification. And as we learned from the over-justification effect earlier, these extrinsic, willpower-dependent strategies frequently backfire. They actively destroy the team's intrinsic drive.
There is a case study of a manager named Sandra that perfectly captures this failure. Her team's deadlines are slipping, the quality of work is dropping, and the energy in the office is just dead.
So Sandra does what almost any modern manager is trained to do.
Right. She tries to manufacture motivation from the outside. She institutes a gamified leaderboard on the wall, tracking everyone's daily output. She offers some small cash incentives, and she starts giving these impassioned, let's push through speeches on Monday mornings.
And the result was entirely predictable based on the science.
Morale tanked even further. The leaderboard bred resentment. The quality of work actually got worse because people were just rushing to hit the metrics, and the team became completely disengaged.
Because Sandra was treating the symptom, not the disease. She was using extrinsic motivators to try and fix a structural, psychological problem. To understand why Sandra failed, we have to look at the gold standard of motivational psychology, self-determination theory, developed by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan.
Right, SDT. This is the framework that explains how intrinsic motivation actually flourishes in groups.
Yes, Deci and Ryan proved that for intrinsic motivation to naturally arise, whether in an office, a classroom, or a family, 3 universal psychological needs must be met. These are the non-negotiable pillars: autonomy, competence, and relatedness.
Let's define those clearly for the listener, because they are essentially the blueprint for leadership.
So autonomy is the fundamental human need to feel a sense of control and agency over your own actions. It's the absolute opposite of being micromanaged.
If you feel like a cog in a machine whose every minute is tracked, like with Sandra's leaderboard, your sense of autonomy is destroyed and your intrinsic motivation dies with it.
Exactly. Okay, so autonomy is control. The second pillar is competence.
Competence is the need to feel capable, effective, and growing.
It's the feeling that your skills are being utilized and stretched just enough to be engaging, but not so much that you feel helpless. It requires clear, constructive feedback, not just arbitrary metrics on a wall.
And the third one, relatedness.
Relatedness is the need to feel connected to others and to a larger purpose. It's understanding why your specific, mundane task matters to the end user, the client, or the team.
So when Sandra finally stopped with the gamification and actually sat down to listen to her team, she realized that all 3 of these pillars were completely broken.
Completely broken.
Her employees didn't understand how their specific data entry tasks connected to the company's bigger goals. So zero relatedness. They felt constantly monitored by the new software, zero autonomy. And they weren't getting any training on the new systems, just pressure to work faster, zero competence.
So what did she change?
She dismantled the token economy entirely. She stopped the leaderboard. Instead, she started connecting their daily tasks to actual client outcomes. She showed them how their data entry directly helped a family secure a home loan, building relatedness.
Brilliant.
She stopped micromanaging their hours and gave them control over how they structured their project timelines, building autonomy. And she started pairing junior staff with senior mentors so they could actually master the software building competence.
And what happened to the motivation?
It returned completely organically, the deadlines were met, and the office energy transformed.
Because she finally understood that in a team setting, motivation is rarely something you can directly inject into people. It is an emergent property. It is a byproduct of an environment where autonomy, competence, and relatedness are thriving.
If those three pillars are not in place, any direct attempt to motivate your team will feel manipulative. It will feel hollow.
It's the exact same lesson on a macro scale as the individual scale. Stop trying to force the feeling and start fixing the systems in the environment.
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of psychological ground today. Let's synthesize this blueprint for you, the listener, so you can actually apply this complex architecture to your own life.
The absolute core takeaway is this. Build systems that do not require daily feelings. Stop waiting for the weather to change.
Remember the great reversal. Action precedes motivation. You have to strike the match to get the heat. The dopamine arrives after you start moving, not before.
Recognize that your willpower is not a moral character trait, but a cognitive state that heavily fluctuates, so protect your attention. Build basal ganglia habit loops by keeping the routine embarrassingly small.
Remember that shifting your identity, genuinely believing I am a writer, is a vastly more durable engine than any external reward.
And finally, recognize that your environment is your invisible architect. Stop relying on willpower to resist the cookies and start using friction to your advantage.
It truly is a complete paradigm shift. It is the transition from amateur emotional goal setting to professional systemic behavioral design.
So as we wrap up, I want to ask you, the listener, to think back to that one project we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive, the one you were waiting to feel spark for.
What happens if today you stop waiting? What happens if you make the very first step so laughably, embarrassingly microscopic that you do not need an ounce of motivation to execute it? What is your 10-minute morning coffee cue?
And I would like to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over. Building on what we've discussed about choice, architecture, and friction.
Let's hear it.
If our brains are biologically wired by evolution to constantly conserve energy and seek the path of least resistance, and we've just spent all this time learning that physical friction deters action, is it possible that the modern world's absolute obsession with extreme comfort and total convenience is actually the greatest existential threat to our intrinsic drive?
Oh, wow.
By engineering all the physical friction out of our daily lives, where our food, our entertainment, and our social interactions are delivered to our screens with one literal tap, have we accidentally engineered away our fundamental capacity to do difficult things?
Oh, that is a heavy, fascinating thought. If society removes all the speed bumps, does the engine of human drive just slowly atrophy and shut down? That is exactly why we have to build our own architecture. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Don't wait for the weather to change, and don't wait for the stove to heat itself. Go strike the match, take that laughably small step today, and we will see you next time.